Welcome to the Rum Ration Podcast. I'm Rejoy.
And I'm Colin. And you know, Rejoy, I was in Hamburg earlier this year, not Hamburger, in Hamburg in Germany, on a business trip. And
Yes, you were.
Between meetings, I found myself standing in the center of the city, looking up at the St. Nikolai Church Memorial. And it's an absolute haunting shell of a building, still blackened out from the fires, its hollow spire reaching up into a perfectly clear blue sky. It honestly felt like everything got quiet as I was sitting there. I was transformed by it, like this heavy, ringing silence in this space, and just kind of like hit me right in the chest. You know, that emotional.
Yeah,
oof.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was so jealous, first of all, when I heard that you were in Hamburg. Beautiful city,
It is.
lovely port city, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Berlin still keeps the ruins of a church in downtown Berlin that you can see, and there's absolutely nothing left of it. As you well know, I lived in Düsseldorf, for many years, and that was another city that was obliterated by the Allied bombers, basically leveled, and you can see it all around you. There's some buildings. I mean, it's been rebuilt beautifully, but you got a lot of 50s, 60s era buildings where once upon a time there were beautiful old houses. The old city was pretty much leveled, but that's what happened with these sorts of campaigns. When you walk through modern German cities today, I mean, everything looks normal, right? I mean, people grabbing coffee, the trams are running on time. Although my German friends, they do complain about the punctuality nowadays. Like everywhere else in the world, Colin, things are on the decline. But then you see a patch of ruins or a memorial like what you saw in Hamburg's St. Nikolai, and the weight of that history, as you so aptly put it, it just drops on you. It's like a hammer.
Yeah.
Understand it.
It's that contrast between like the normalcy of 2026 and the absolute absence that would have existed in, say, July 1943.
Yeah.
Visiting that memorial, like I realized, this wasn't a trench line. It was a civilian neighborhood. And as history geeks, we're used to seeing some images of destruction at ground level, artillery craters, block by block fighting, soldiers fighting soldiers. But this spire is a monument to something that happened from 3 miles up in the air.
And, just speaking of 3 miles up in the air or so, it brings back a memory. So we lived in a little town just outside of Düsseldorf called Ratingen. Basically, it'd be like your Mississauga to Toronto, that type of thing.
Well,
and sometimes
nicer forests. I liked it there.
Nicer. Well, a lot of nicer, but in terms of what you see. But I remember driving in, and there's when I got into the city itself, there was a certain junction where I would stop for the light, and you see these houses, which were definitely late 19th century houses, row houses that you see in the cities. That had not been destroyed. And you see the tram lines, and this is coming to your point where you see the normalcy of it. Yeah. And sometimes I'd be waiting for the light, and being a history geek, my mind would just sort of time travel back, and I'd imagine this scene in the 40s. The tram lines are there. These houses are the same houses that are there, and just imagining people going to and fro when the air raid sirens go.
Yeah,
and they were lucky in that area that they didn't get hit. But back to Hamburg. Hamburg was the first civilian city that was basically turned into an incinerator. It was terrible what happened to Hamburg.
Yeah.
And standing in those ruins, you can't help but think about how we as societies got there, Well, it brings you back to a line from a British politician in 1932, the very well-known Stanley Baldwin, who stood before Parliament during a debate on international affairs and disarmament. More to come on that, and gave a warning that basically defined the 20th century when he said, "The bomber will always get through." That's
right.
Now, he was warning that air power had made civilians directly vulnerable in a way that previous wars had not, right?
Yeah, and we often focus on that one line, of course, that he said, "The bomber always gets through," for people who couldn't understand your crappy accent. But the follow-up to that line was even darker. That the only way to save yourselves was to kill more of their women and children more quickly than the enemy could kill yours.
Yeah, it's a really terrible statement to have to make, and I think that's the crux of it. You have to make it to make people understand what the era of modern warfare meant. We'll sort of dive into that, because the First World War really transformed everything,
yes.
and all of a sudden things became much clearer as to how this world of ours is going to change. And that of course, is the dark heart of of the strategic bombing theory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the central question that we're digging into today. Now, if the bomber always gets through, does it actually do what the theorists promised? That's the big question
Mm-hmm.
mark that we're going to discuss. Does it break the enemy's will, or does it just build a more resilient kind of defense?
Mm-hmm. London Blitz spirit, anyone?
Exactly.
Yeah. Today on the Rum Ration Podcast, we're looking at the evolution of air power by focusing on what you can actually, can you actually shock and awe a population into surrender? That's basically what we're going to be trying to discuss
Yeah,
today.
exactly. Yes.
So, Rejoy, where does the idea of morale bombing actually begin? Because for most of human history, war has been something that's happened kind of like over there,
Yes.
on a defined battlefield, not
Yes.
necessarily, lining up perfectly pretty low rows of colorful tunics troops that are facing off each other. But if it was happening at home in a civilian part of town, it was because the enemy troops had broken through your lines and they were raping and pillaging their way across your country. Like it was, if the war came home,
Yeah.
it was already over. It's going
It
to be
was already
bad.
over.
It was really bad. Yeah. And it wasn't because bombs were starting to fall out of the sky.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Back in let's cover that last century, the 19th century. Essentially, commanders picked their field.
Yeah.
For battle. Whoever got there first decided this is where I'm going to give battle. I mean, Wellington and Waterloo was famous for that. He went and scouted out the battlefield. He knew
Yeah.
exactly where he wanted to fight and why. And suddenly everything changed.
Well, they didn't
And
want to get pulled into cities because it's just so, you get
exactly.
ground down.
Exactly. So I'd say it really shifted. Everything shifted with the arrival of the Zeppelins in World War I. Now, Zeppelins are, for those who don't know, named after Graf von Zeppelin, who was one of the inventors of it. Or
So
had
it
a
wasn't
hand
the
in it.
heavy metal rock group?
Well, I believe they were there. They played at the opening ceremony. The cellos looked a bit different.
They did.
There was what they did with the violins was amazing. I think that kicked out the whole guitar trend. But Zeppelins are basically massive hydrogen-filled airships, and they would send these things over England at night because again. One day we'll go back and do a little bit more on the First World War, which is our passion, really. But it's been described by many historians that Germany saw while France had the armies, Britain had the navy, and of course was really the power behind the throne, so to speak. So Britain was the main enemy, and France was their sword arm, so to speak, right? So when they sent the Zeppelins over to bomb, London was a target, and the British ports were a target, and that's what they wanted to do. And they started sending them out relatively early in the war, I believe, just to drop bombs over the side, because of course there were no bomb bays. There was nothing like what will come later. And the thing about these things is they were silent.
Yeah.
They could turn off their engines and just glide over a city to carry out surprise attacks. So they'd be powered on the journey over the continent and over the English Channel. You spot the coast of Great Britain, turn off the engines.
And they just start shoving bombs over when you're
Yeah.
when you're lined up. That sounds like a total nightmare scenario. There's no incoming whistle, no early warning, just the world suddenly exploding while you're in bed. And the first bomb actually fell on Dover on Christmas Eve, 1914, almost like it was scripted by a film producer.
Now that you've put that out there, I think there'll be a Netflix series on that.
Call us Netflix. We're always looking for sponsors.
That's right. And we're happy to consult on set. And the Germans weren't just hitting docks, though, were they? Now, you had high-ranking advocates of this type of warfare, like Admiral Benka, believed that bombing London's civilian population would cause a panic so deep that it would make continuing the war impossible. So here we have the seeds planted. Oh, wow.
So he's the first? That admiral was the first who said, wait a minute, I got an idea.
Yes. The parts are good, but I think of something better. No, you didn't. He wanted to hit the Admiralty and the docks to render the war effort doubtful. But he was the one that was thinking about, why don't we also hit the civilians while we're at it and, scare the shit out of them.
And they'll panic and they'll put pressure on the government to end the war. That's basically the theory, right?
That's basically the theory.
Well, good. And thankfully, we've learned from that, and we've never tried to do that again.
Yes, yes, we march on in our progress.
But the sources show that, well, oops, the opposite happened. The raids on Hull and London caused nearly 5,000 casualties, which is not insignificant by any means.
No.
But instead of demanding peace, the British people were clamoring for reprisal raids against German towns. Revenge.
Up the empire.
Exactly. It's the first sign of a pattern. The psychological shock, the initial shock, is massive. But the political result is usually not, oh, that really hurt. Please make it stop. Let's sign any peace terms we can. It's hit them back and hit them harder.
That's really when you've not understood who you're fighting.
Exactly.
You're taking on the British Empire at the time, in which was really at its peak power. And do you really think you hit London, you kill a few thousand people, which is tragic, of course, and shocking because it never happened before.
Right.
But what are they going to do? This is an empire that doesn't have a history of just lying back and taking it.
No.
So I think they really didn't understand what they were doing there. And by 1917, though, they switched from airships to Gotha bombers. Because apparently, I guess the airships weren't doing enough to crack morale. So let's switch it up.
Clearly, this is failing, so let's bomb them more.
And if you've not seen a picture of a Gotha bomber, I encourage you to go out there and Google these things because they were massive.
They were
massive, huge things. And brilliantly constructed, I would say, for the time. If you see, you'll understand what I mean if you see a picture of them. Now, these things could fly as high as 20,000 feet, which was incredible for the time.
Absolutely.
And so therefore entirely unmolested by any British or French biplanes. Again, going back to a strategy that we rediscovered in the 60s and 70s, fly higher.
That's right.
If we can get into space and drop a bomb from there, hey, that's the next
that's what
next
they're
frontier.
doing now.
So. But the only thing they didn't think about is how damn cold it gets up there.
It's very cold.
So the crew had to be really bundled up, and they had to breathe bottled oxygen through tubes in their mouths just to stay alive up there. So that's, again, see the beginning of all this.
So I'm always intrigued by the firsts, right? Like, did someone have that scientific knowledge, or did the first crew fucking die or almost die, and they got back like, oh my God, we could breathe. Better reeks of oxygen.
And can you imagine being the crew? You're being told, okay, you're going to fly this massive big thing now. By the way, it's going to get pretty cold up there, and here's a jar. Breathe through that if you can.
Yeah.
It's like
history has lost the names of very important people, such as the first guy or girl who ate a certain berry that we know now. Don't eat that fucking berry. Remember Bob foaming at the mouth, choking, feet tremoring. Yeah, I wouldn't eat that. Good old Bob. Barry Bob.
We'll remember him. We won't remember his name, but we'll remember him.
Barry Bob. Yeah. Okay.
Barry Bob.
Let's try and get this back on track. The fear in London, though, was real.
Yes.
And the civilian population, although not maybe panicking, they were, in a British way, certainly concerned. But the fear was so intense that at one point you had 300,000 people sheltering in the London Tube, their underground, their subway, which was actually double the number who would shelter there during the actual Blitz in 1940.
Which is remarkable when you think about it, because what the city went through in the Blitz, of course, I mean, this is incomparable to that. And yet you had more people here. I think it's also because it was the first time they had experienced anything like this. And I think one of the things it did achieve, I would argue, is that it planted that seed of nascent fear about how cities could be completely destroyed in the future. Hence you get, like the paranoia of the 60s, and the 50s, and after especially the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and but the fact that the city that you live in could be touched and your home blown up was new to them. So no wonder it's a staggering number of people who took shelter in the tube stations, because what the hell is this?
Yeah.
It shows that the home front had really become the front line all of a sudden. And this is long before the interwar theorists had even started writing it in their books or making it a fashionable term.
Yeah.
It's living the experience and understanding what's happening.
And the British learned from it. By 1918, they had an integrated defense system with searchlights and anti-aircraft guns, which required whole different types of ammunition. And they had figured out how the proximity fuses would work and the altitude pressures and all this kind of stuff. It's incredible, the pace of scientific research and advancement. But the seed was planted, the belief that air power could bypass the army and win the war by breaking the civilian spirit.
Yeah.
I guess that's an attractive theory because, especially after the horrors of the trench warfare in World War One, just millions of men being slaughtered in the mud. And they go, well, if we could just fly some planes over and we could end this in a knockout blow, it'd be really quick.
Yeah, exactly. To counter the stalemate of what was happening for so many years. And again, you've got that idea of here's a brand new weapon.
Right.
We're always talking about these brand new weapons which are going to change the face of warfare.
Drone. AI.
Exactly. And then when you're using them on a regular basis, you understand them better. So as we'll see, I mean, this theory was based on a very shaky understanding of very, very shaky understanding of human psychology. I think something that still permeates to this day. So
now we get to the 1920s and 30s. Everyone's looking at what happened in World War One and thinking, next time the sky will just fall.
Yes.
And this is where Baldwin's speech really lands.
Or as I like to call him, Chicken Little. So now Baldwin wasn't some warmonger. That's the important thing to understand here. He was actually terrified. And that's why, going back to what we were earlier speaking, when you mentioned him speaking in Parliament, he was terrified of the consequences of this new weapon. He told the House of Commons that there is no power on earth that can protect the man in the street from being bombed. And again, that's terror.
Yeah, it is. And he was basically being a mathematician of despair. He talked about tens of millions of cubic miles of sky to defend. And he said, just, you can't catch every plane. Hence, the bomber will always get through. Yeah. The only defense in his mind was a better offense. He literally said the question would be, quote, whose morale will be shattered quickest? Close quote.
That puts that line into context. Now, that's exactly what we were talking about. It's not some, raving lunatic talking about wiping out people. He's talking about how do we win in a situation where you can't catch every bomber, where we're going to get pulverized. So what do? Pulverize them faster so that they stop first. Who stops first? Anyway. He sounds like a great guy. He must have been a riot at dinner parties.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he's exactly the guy you want to have around when the chips are down. Come on, Stan, come over and cheer me up. Well, that was a bad call. Anyway, this gave birth to the bomber mafia theory. So people like Giulio Douhet in Italy and Air Marshal Hugh Trenchard, later Marshal of the Royal Air Force Lord Trenchard, and often called the father of the Royal Air Force, now in the UK, and he believed air power alone could deliver a knockout blow. Now, how many officers and soldiers of their own service believe that their arm is the best and the strongest and the war-ending arm? It's normal, I think. Now, both these two advocates thought that you could win by smashing industrial nodes and demoralizing the population. Again, going back to what Admiral Benka was talking about, right? So basically, escalation is the answer. So if the first, bombing the first few factories doesn't work, well, just bomb all the smithereens. Isn't that always the way? Escalation.
Yeah, naturally. Escalate, right? That's why we're here talking military history. There's so many examples. But it's also interesting from a leadership perspective because you're essentially gambling your entire national military strategy on the idea that the enemy civilians' will is the weakest point in the chain. And it's interesting. You talked about this as like the theory, the bombing theory. And yet there was already evidence of, so it wasn't just a theory, there was evidence of the morale not collapsing when the first bombing in World War I that we talked about. So it's funny that we decided just to kind of ignore that and we'll keep advancing this theory.
Yeah. And yet, again, is that shaky grasp of human psychology and knowing who you're fighting against and understanding the culture and understanding the mentality of the people. I think both sides are guilty of it throughout. And the technology seemed to back it up, though, what they were thinking, though. I mean, again, everything started progressing at such a fast rate.
Yeah.
By the mid-30s, all metal monoplanes were faster and flew higher than anything from World War I. So again, remember the transition. World War I, really the birth of aviation
Hmm.
and the use of air forces in war. So you've got canvas and wood biplanes, which in hindsight are really quite,
Flimsy.
flimsy. Yeah, and it takes a lot of bravery just to get into one of those crates. And now you've got all metal monoplanes, uh, and they're zipping along at quite a rate. And for a while, the bomber actually was faster than the fighters meant to catch it.
Wow. Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
can you believe that? I mean, it boggles the mind at the time. The Bristol Type 142, the aircraft that eventually became the Blenheim, the twin-engine bomber, first flew in 1935 and was so quick that testing showed it could outpace every RAF fighter then in service. Uh,
Yeah.
and keep in mind, though, this is before the Spitfire was on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
scene, which set
But
speed
still,
records.
it's the advancement, and you
But
can
still.
understand why people. Now I'm starting to understand why the theory could be like, holy shit, you've got these bombers, the fighters can't even catch them. Of course,
You
the
can't even catch them.
bombers always going to get through, and it's going to pound with the enemy cities to smithereens, and then the civilians will rise up and overthrow their governments.
Yeah, it all kind of makes sense in the thinking of the time, and I think many people are guilty of looking back at these scenarios from a modern
Sure.
viewpoint, right?
Yeah.
I mean, put yourself in their shoes, and
Yeah.
and with the knowledge that they had as opposed to the
Right.
knowledge that we have.
Yeah.
And so this is a rather alarming discovery. If your national defense plan, well, depends on catching the damn thing. Yeah.
You need a faster fighter,
You need a fast
which
fighter.
could be maybe an early incentive to build an Avro Arrow.
Back to the arrow.
See episode 18 of the Rum Ration
Thank you.
Podcast to learn
That's
all
it.
about Canada's ill-fated supersonic fighter attack plane. Okay, seriously though, the theory becomes hit them hard enough and the population will rise up and overthrow their own government just to make the bombing stop. Well, thankfully, modern governments have learned that this doesn't work.
Yes.
Which
yes.
brings us neatly to this episode's fantasy sponsor, Trenchard's Tactical Gin.
The gin for the air power theorist who believes defense is important, but only in the sense that offense sounds more exciting.
Distilled at altitude, bottled under pressure, and guaranteed to get through any dinner party conversation about disarmament.
Oh, yes. Notes of juniper, misplaced certainty, and just a hint of surely this will all be over by Christmas.
Aren't they always? Trenchard's Tactical Gin, because when your whole strategy depends on breaking the enemy's will, you may as well start with your own liver.
And in what a great way to do it, too. So, anyway, that was the gamble. The British government hoped for a repeat of the 1918 collapse of the German home front. So that was what they were thinking about. And by 1935, the RAF was getting 40% of the
Wow.
defense budget to make it happen. 40%.
Well, not quite Avro Arrow levels, but close. Wasn't it 70% at one point of the entire defense budget going into the Arrow? Yeah. But then comes the reality check. In 1943, over a city called Hamburg, they decided to put that theory to its most brutal test yet.
Operation Gomorrah, July 1943. God, even the name sounds like a biblical ending, a rain of fire and ruin coming from above.
Sir Arthur Bomber Harris, he decides to concentrate everything on Hamburg. It was an unusually hot, dry summer there, and he sends in pathfinders to drop these yellow flares just after midnight. Survivors said that the flares looked like beautiful Christmas trees falling from the sky.
Yeah, Bomber Harris, he of the very complicated reputation
Yes.
since, and it was really a recipe for the ultimate firestorm. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Pathfinders, we're not talking about the Scouts.
No.
In the Boy Scout movement sense. And again, by this point, the British had already started to really perfect the idea of the strategic heavy bombing.
Mhm.
So instead of
Nighttime-
just
nighttime bombing.
nighttime,
Yeah.
thank you, nighttime bombing. So instead of just flying over blind, thinking, obviously cities had blackouts at that time. So flying over blind and hopefully dropping your bombs on the target, they took some of their best bomber crews and made them into what they call pathfinders. So pathfinders had the unenviable job
Mm.
of flying first over a city, where of course many of them would be picked up by the searchlights, by the anti-aircraft defenses, and spotlighted. But their job was not to bomb. Their job was to mark the target
That's right.
and then get out of there as quickly as possible. So you can imagine what that entailed. And
And
so
I
when
think they flew even lower too, so they
they
get
flew
more.
lower,
So it was
yeah, yeah,
very dangerous.
extremely dangerous, and that's what, and they would drop flares. So you can, well, that sort of gives you an idea of what these civilians would, all of a sudden, this dark sky, the sirens are going off, the lights are flashing all over the place. They look up and they see these flares just floating over
Beautiful
their
Christmas
city,
trees.
beautiful Christmas trees, until the cookies and blockbusters, and we're not talking about the internet or anything like that. We're talking about these heavy, heavy bombs, 8,000-pound bombs,
Wow.
designed to blow the roofs off buildings so that, well, happier still, the incendiaries could fall inside and burn out what was left.
Wow. So
Very convenient.
you've got the first wave of bombers going off, dropping these 8,000-pound bombs that would blow off the roofs. And then the second wave would come over and drop incendiaries, so fire bombs, inside the houses that no longer have roofs on them.
Yeah.
Wow. And they dropped 350,000 incendiary bombs in the first raid alone. They purposely created something the world had never really seen before, a man-made firestorm. And you used the word incinerator at the beginning of the episode, and that's exactly what Hamburg was turned into, an incinerator. The heat rose to over 1,000 degrees Celsius, and it created a vacuum that sucked in air so fast it generated hurricane-force winds of fire.
Winds between 195 and 275 kilometers per hour. Trees were uprooted. People literally swept away into the flames. And if you've been there, like you were, Colin, and you can look around and you imagine that happening to such a beautiful city, it's terrifying. And there are stories that Hamburgers to this day will still speak about when they've known people who lived through it, or did know of people who lived through it. Of course, now there are fewer and fewer of them. But Hamburg has a beautiful canal system.
That's right.
I'm sure you saw some of those with warehouses directly onto the canals. And there are stories of them, of people diving or jumping into the canals just to try and escape the flames. And even then, the flames swept over the water.
Yeah.
It was that bad. Eyewitnesses, as you put it, firestorm, very apt term for it. And they said the firestorm was screaming.
That's how fast the winds were going. Yeah. And if you were in a basement trying to protect yourself, the fire consumed all the oxygen. So you didn't necessarily burn to death. You just stopped breathing until the structural concrete walls that were shaking around you. You were suffocated in your own shelter.
Yeah. 40,000 people died in 1 week. 40,000. The survivors who crawled out of the shelters described a city of ash and charred bodies, quote, baked together like a piece of bread, unquote.
Wow. God.
One resident, Mathilde Wolf-Münkenberg, wrote that people were filled with, quote, a dumb kind of passive apathy. I suppose that's sort of, I guess, with soldiers, you could say like the 1,000-yard stare, or that kind of look.
You're numbed into.
Numbed.
Yeah, just numbed into it. Yeah. And this is where we look at this theory of breaking will, because Albert Speer, who was Hitler's armaments minister, said Hamburger, quote, put the fear of God, end quote, in him. And he told Hitler that 6 more attacks like this would end German war production. I wonder how he came up with such a precise number like 6.
I think, one evening you're having a schnapps. You're thinking, how many? 6? 6 is a good number. It looks nice on paper.
You'd think, for our younger listeners, you'd say 6, 7.
But there's the complication, isn't there? It's very easy to say things like that, especially when you're not in Hamburg.
That's a fact.
Right. Did it break the people? The strategic bombing survey later found that while morale deteriorated, the people didn't rise up.
No.
In a police state, withdrawing support from the government meant death.
Yeah.
If only there was a modern parallel we could compare this to. If only we could see if this is happening anywhere now, and maybe learn some lessons from history.
No, I don't think so. I don't think anyone would be foolish enough to try and bomb a civilian population and hope that they would rise up and overthrow their political masters. Particularly not in a autocratic police state.
No, and even if you were to tell them your liberation is at hand, to overthrow your government.
That's right. We're here to help.
We're here to help.
No, not the Rest is Politics podcast.
Yet again.
Here's the But here's the kicker for the bomber mafia theory there. Within 5 months,
And
Hamburg's industry was back to 80% of its
yes,
pre-bombing levels. That's crazy.
yes,
And the
yes,
people didn't revolt. They just went back to work because they had to.
yeah,
To eat, you needed ration cards. To get ration cards, well, you had to work and obey the state.
yeah.
And not to worry about Spear's math, because Hamburg was bombed another 70 times during the war. So it wasn't 6. He was worried to overthrow the state. But apparently the Nazi officials were panicked when this first happened, because they were like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Any autocratic state always, the tighter the grip, the more paranoid they are that they're going to lose a hold of that grip. And that's why they tighten it more and more and more and more. And they're terrified of their own people, right?
Absolutely right.
So they thought they would rise up, but they didn't.
And just to be clear again, Hamburg was one of those very anti-Nazi cities as well.
Mhm.
So what was happening to them was very much against everything was
Yeah.
against what they stood for. But like what happened with the Blitz, I mean, they dug in their heels. They knew they had to survive. This was not going to be over soon. They can't separate from Germany and
Right.
become the free state of Hamburg.
Yeah.
So you carry on, and that's what they did. Like the Brits were doing in London at the same time, in other cities as well. So Baldwin's bomber got through, and it created hell on earth, just as he predicted. But the will of the nation? Well, it just hardened into a fatalistic mood of survival.
Right.
And that's something, having lived in Germany for many years, I get that part of the natural character. There is this, there's just this will to carry on, and
Well, we said at the beginning, the Blitz spirit.
yeah,
That's what I find odd, is that the same government that is orchestrating a propaganda campaign about keep calm, carry on, although that was
keep on,
never
carry
actually,
on.
I mean, they
Yeah,
prepared it, they never actually launched it.
no,
Because the Blitz spirit came out, they didn't have to. So
yeah.
that your own people have this Blitz spirit, and the more that they get bombed, the better the resilience gets. So you decide, well, we'll just go bomb the Germans and they'll collapse and fall apart because they're not as morally strong as our people. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
get it. I don't get it.
Maybe it didn't work for them, but it'll work for us, type of
Right.
thing. I mean, that sounds more like a Toronto Maple Leaf strategy, but yeah.
Next year, the
Yes,
playoffs. Next year.
I'm bitter, still bitter. But that's so true. It's absolutely ridiculous, and the justification that the bombing would destroy the German industrial output.
Not so much.
Not so much at all. Under Albert Speer, the German armament production tripled, not doubled, not increased, tripled, starting in 1942, and that's despite the increased bombing.
Wow.
So, Harris doing the same thing that many others before him and many others after him since have done, is looking at it. Well, obviously the answer is to ramp it up.
More bombing.
Uh,
More bombing.
And let's not forget, they had a certain, I mean, here's the unsavory part of it as well, slave labor.
Ah.
The Germans, of course, at that point were deporting many, what they, what did they term them? The
Undesirables.
undesirables. Thank you. The undesirables to work as slave labor. That would include intelligentsia, Jews, of course, gypsies, homosexuals, you name it. Anybody who disagreed with them was deported to work as slave labor.
Well, they're
And-
also importing millions of slaves from Poland, from France, from Denmark,
that's what I meant.
from
Yeah.
Holland.
Yeah. That's right. That's where they were getting them all from.
Yeah.
Despite Speer trying to forget it during the Nuremberg trials, what is this slave labor you speak of? I don't know anything of it. Completely decided not to address it.
No, and just because my favorite pastime is shattering sacred cow myths, Speer had a certain resilience through inefficiency. This blows my mind because everyone thinks that the Germans are so buttoned up and so efficient, because the German industry, I can't believe this, in 1942 was still on a single shift basis. No wonder they tripled capacity after 42. They just made them work an extra shift, and they had high civilian consumption levels. It possessed a cushion, basically, that absorbed early bombing damage, and they took all their centralized armaments factories and other major manufacturing, and they dispersed it to do piecework, kind of like the Brits had done. All the Spitfires were not built in one place; they were built in 20 different factories spread all over the place.
That's right.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the war, also, I mean, there was this conception of they did know their own people to a certain extent. They
Hmm.
didn't, and there was still a lot. There was a lot of opposition to the war.
Hmm.
People did not want to go to war. There was no joyous celebration of it. I mean,
No.
William Shire, in his book *The Nightmare Years*, talks about how when they announced war in 1939, he was hoping for the crowds to come out like they did in 1914 in some cities. Instead, Berliners just looked away. It was a
Yeah.
rainy day, looked away and shrugged and headed back home knowing what was to come.
Yeah.
So they did not want to really put them onto a war footing per se. Keep the war at arm's length,
Yeah.
so you don't feel it until they had to feel it.
Yeah.
Sounds again a little bit familiar.
Wasn't it? Yeah. Wasn't it 42 or 40, early 43, that that famous speech by the little poison dwarf there about bringing
Oh,
them,
you mean Mr. Goebbels?
bringing him to, he hand selected like 11,000 of the most faithful and had a big rally, and, do you want total war? And it's like holy shit, man.
Oh, yes.
They'd already suffered Stalingrad, and
Yes.
you didn't consider yourself being at total war already. Holy shit.
Now is the time.
But now we get it. They were still
Yeah.
on single shift production. As you said, they're trying to keep things as normal as possible for the population. It's
In
crazy.
fact, they went to the heights of basically outright lying and deception.
What,
So,
Nazis were lying?
I mean, I know it's hard to believe, isn't
I,
it? I mean, who would have thought? But you spoke of Stalingrad just now. So
Mhm.
by December, end of December 1942, it was quite clear the battle had been lost. And they still had their Christmas celebrations
Of course.
for the home front, which was every front where German troops were fighting, they would call in by radio and sing "O Tannenbaum" or some German Christmas song. They actually fabricated a choir that was supposedly singing from Stalingrad.
Stalingrad.
And Goebbels announced, and now from our brave soldiers in Stalingrad holding out against the communist hordes. And there was this, there's this choir. And the soldiers stuck in the basements in Stalingrad, freezing to death,
Heard this.
heard this, and they couldn't fucking believe it. Yeah. So
Oh.
that's what you're talking about.
Wow.
And about the slaves, let's not forget all 20 million.
20 million.
20 million of them. Well, they made a pretty significant contribution. I mean, how can you not? There's 20 million of them, despite Speer's claims to be shocked about learning about them after the war. I can almost picture him in the dock saying, who knew?
Exactly.
Slaves? 20 million. I didn't know.
Well, people fail to. It's convenient for us to think of. I think convenient for us to be able to try and justify what happened with the Holocaust and all that by saying, well, concentration camps were these big industrial death camps that were, far, far away, mostly in Poland. No one knew what was going on. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
There were concentration camp didn't mean death camp. It just meant a place to keep people, concentrate them in one spot.
That's right. That's right.
And in a city,
not all were death camps. There were work camps too. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And they weren't all huge. Some of them had 20, 30, 40 people in them. It's just because you needed a place for them to sleep after they came home from their shift. Or double shift of being a slave in one of Speer's armament factories or wherever. So
French prisoners of war were also included in, which was, again, I mean, forget by this point, all conventions of war, the Geneva Convention is right out the window.
Yeah.
But even using POWs,
crazy.
Terrible.
All right.
Terrible.
So speaking of after the war, we have the strategic bombing surveys. Thousands of investigators interviewed Germans to see if the theory of bombing had actually worked.
So in your notes, when you wrote that, this brought a huge sardonic smile to my face. So, I mean, you got to love that. War's over. You've been fighting on probably, say the Russian front, which is, no picnic. Somehow you survived. You get home. You're standing
bombed out rubble.
You're standing there staring at this, pile of rubble, that used to be your home. And then some guy comes up and taps you on the shoulder, says,
the clipboard.
The clipboard. Probably English. Excuse me. Very polite. Excuse me. Would you mind taking a survey?
There could be an Amazon gift card if you answer a question.
It boggles the mind. So anyway, Needless to say, the results were awkward for the air power advocates.
Ooh.
The survey found that German war production actually increased, as you mentioned earlier. I think tripled was the word, right?
Triples.
Through most of the bombing campaign. The bombing was bruising, but not the knockout blow that the theorists promised,
Oops.
surprisingly enough.
Mhm.
Um, but before we leave the rubble and move on, a word from our next fantasy sponsor, Strategic Bombing Survey Single Malt.
Ah, yes, a mature smoky whiskey with complex notes of burnt theory, uncomfortable data, and senior officers quietly avoiding eye contact.
Each bottle is aged in barrels made from old assumptions, then carefully reviewed by thousands of investigators asking, so, did any of this actually work?
The finish is long, bitter, and followed by a 400-page appendix.
Strategic Bombing Survey Single Malt. For when the war is over, the city is gone, and someone from head office wants to know if the PowerPoint was effective.
But it
Oh.
seems we forgot that lesson by 1965, because 20 years later, Operation Rolling Thunder in Vietnam. But before we get
Yes.
there, we've almost forgotten to mention our beloved regiment's involvement with strategic bombing.
Yes!
Because,
Yes,
of course, a
has to
reserve
be.
infantry battalion from Canada would be involved in strategic bombing.
Makes perfect sense. Absolutely perfect sense. So that's right. Our beloved Royal Montreal Regiment, the RMR, suffered multiple aerial bombings and air raid incidents from the German Luftwaffe during the Second World War, primarily while stationed in England for training. So it's not such a happy role they played, but
More on
they
the
suffering
receiving
side.
end,
Receiving end.
they weren't on the delivery end.
No.
They were more on the reception part. So key incidents involving the Luftwaffe that are recorded in our regimental history include the first air raid, which they suffered on the 26th of August, 1940. And the regiment experienced its first direct air raid while stationed at Epsom Downs. And during this attack, 13 bombs fell. Almost seems quaint after describing what happened in Hamburg, right? And the camp was hit with incendiary bombs. In a later night raid at the same location, the camp was described as being in the center of a blazing inferno from incendiaries, though casualties were avoided in that specific instance. Yeah, I guess that'd be like a birthday candle compared to the Great Fire of London.
Yeah, that's right. But sadly, there were casualties in general, of course. We have Sergeant Fred Jennings, who was killed by a Luftwaffe raid at Borden in East Hampshire. Corporal H.C. Thoburn, killed by enemy air action at Wallington, Surrey, in February 1944. At which point you're kind of thinking we've got the upper hand now. This shouldn't be happening, but there you are. Private T.R. Randall and his wife were injured when a flying bomb struck their home in July 1940.
Almost as painful was the destruction of regimental colors. The regiment's second set of colors, which had been donated by the city of Westmount and sent to England for a planned presentation on foreign soil, were destroyed in the German Blitz while being stored in London.
And being noble gentlemen all, not a slacker ever to be found within the ranks of the regiment, there was plenty of assistance to civilians. When the hospital at nearby Banstead was bombed, resulting in 22 civilian deaths. Again, now the numbers look high, but in comparison to what was happening, I suppose, not as much. The RMR supplied 50 men to help clear the debris.
And of course, there was actual combat engagement. In October 1940, RMR troops used a Vickers machine gun mounted on a truck to fire at low-flying German aircraft. And the plane eventually crashed, and while the RMR naturally claimed credit for bringing it down, official proof was never established. But here at the Rum Ration Podcast, we can claim with absolute certainty that it must have happened because, we never let facts get in the way of a good story, particularly one about the RMR.
That's right. If the RMR said it happened, then it happened.
It happened.
That's it. And we will block comments on that particular part. While exciting at first, the regimental history sources note that as the Battle of Britain raged in the skies above them, the war in the sky became a routine part of daily life for the RMR soldiers.
On a more sobering note, the scale of the Allied effort underscores the transition of air power into a dominant strategic force.
This is really interesting.
Yeah, of ordnance, approximately 2.7 million tons of bombs were dropped. Tons. Like these, imagine loading up these, your average transport truck that you see on the highway is rated to carry 40, 2,000 pounds, so about 40 tons, right? So 20 tons you can carry. But there's 2.7 million tons being dropped. The human cost on the Allied side of air crew, because it wasn't all easy peasy. Yes, it's shitty to be on the receiving end of a bombing raid, but it wasn't exactly a bed of roses being on the delivery side. 79,265 American, 79,281 British, and 10,600 Canadian airmen were lost in action.
Yes. Yeah.
Physical destruction in Germany, 20% of all dwelling units, about 3.6 million homes and apartments were destroyed or heavily damaged, and 7.5 million people were made homeless.
Yeah. Numbers are staggering.
They are.
And I think...
And that's nothing to do with Japan.
No, that's right.
Man.
This is just the ETO. So
yeah, the Tokyo firestorm made Hamburg look like a birthday cake.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was absolutely shocking.
100,000 people killed, I think.
Yes, something like that.
More than both Nagasaki and Hiroshima combined.
Yeah, and classic or traditional Tokyo was wiped out.
Yes.
And city was rebuilt because a lot of the houses were made of paper and wood.
Yeah, paper and wood.
So highly flammable. I think we've rightly, of course, concentrated on the victims of the strategic bombing campaign, but you made a very good point in terms of the cost to the air crews as well. And that is very important to remember. And it was a terrifying thing to go up in those bombers day after day, night after night, because the Americans practiced day bombing, and the Brits and Canadians by night. So it was 24-hour cycles. And there's a very good series. I think Tom Hanks who does a lot of wonderful work with in putting these series together. I think he had a hand in this called Masters of the Air. I think it's on Apple, and it gives you a good idea of what these air crews went through, and it concentrates on the American effort and a certain squadron, but the terrifying role that they had to play and to get in those planes and what they faced. I mean, it was really terrifying. Unbelievable what they went through. But I just wanted to also make that point. So back to the Vietnam War, as we were talking about earlier on, and the American strategic bombing campaign, because there we have it again. Strategic bombing. Let's do a strategic bombing campaign. It was the same Baldwin logic, Colin, the same thing. The Johnson administration used bombing as a diplomatic signal. The idea was to escalate the violence until Ho Chi Minh blinked, so to speak. And again, I know this isn't a politics podcast, but it just feels so on the nose in the spring of 2026, or going into summer now. So,
But in 1965, they were targeting resolve instead of military assets. I mean, how desperate do you have to be to sitting around a table convincing yourself that we're just going to go after the civilian resolve? But the U.S. Air Force leadership at the time complained the campaign had no clear-cut objective. That's a fair accusation.
Very fair, yeah.
And the campaign failed. Images of civilian casualties actually depleted support for the war back home in the United States.
Yeah, there you have it sort of rebounds back on you. Instead of breaking the enemy's morale, you're breaking your own country's morale. The sources say that despite dropping more than twice as much tonnage as the U.S. Air Force dropped in all of World War II, twice as much, Operation Rolling Thunder, that's what they termed it, was ultimately regarded as ineffective. Surprise. Turns out that when you try to play with the psyche of a determined enemy, they usually just dig in deeper.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Who would have thunk it?
If only they had seen that happen somewhere before, they would have known better. But there you are. Well, that brings us to the modern era. The first Gulf War of 1991. And that infamous term that you brought up earlier, Colin, shock and awe.
Ah, yes. Planners in the black hole in Riyadh were still using a version of the Baldwin thread. They targeted the telecommunications and electricity in Baghdad to, quote, put every Iraqi household in an autonomous mode, end quote, and then, quote, play with their psyches, end quote.
All those big words. You know, they literally wanted the Iraqi people to think, hey, your lights will come back on as soon as you get rid of Saddam.
We even saw this in the War of the Cities between Iran and Iraq in the 80s. Iraq fired Al-Hussein missiles, which were modified Scuds, into Tehran, and they killed hundreds of civilians, including many children. But the people didn't rise up, and the war dragged on for years after those attacks.
Yeah. In the Gulf War, well, we had the precision hitting single bunker or phone exchange instead of leveling a whole suburb like Hamburg. I mean, you could see the smart bombs, how effective they were. And of course, that led to the argument of, oh, we're not, we're doing pinpoint targeting here.
Right.
We're not, there's no collateral damage, so to speak, which, well, that's an argument for another day. But even with the F-117 stealth fighter bombers getting through, well, Saddam stayed in power for another decade.
Yeah, and as former soldiers, we know that breaking will isn't a math problem you can solve from 30,000 feet. You can destroy the infrastructure of a society, but unless you're prepared to occupy the ground and assume responsibility for what happens under your watch, I think that's the key part. If you're going to knock out a leadership and create a vacuum, someone's got to step into it, and you need to be prepared to do it yourself or support it.
Yep, that's right.
If you haven't done that, you haven't won the argument.
No, not at all. Baldwin was right. The bomber will always get through, but the theorists were wrong about what happens once it does. The fire might destroy the city, but often it just tempers the steel that people left in the ruins, which is exactly what you were saying just now.
Yeah, it strengthens the resolve, doesn't diminish it.
Nope.
And standing there at St. Nikolai in Hamburg earlier this year, looking at that jagged spire, that was a real lesson for me. The silence of the ruins is a reminder that you can kill people, but you can't necessarily kill the resolve of the people.
No. Well, join us next time on Rum Ration Podcast as we look at Operation Mincemeat.
Mm-hmm.
No, not the pies.
Oh, come on. I love mincemeat pie.
I love mincemeat pies too. But this is the incredible story of a deception plan that may have changed the outcome of the Second World War.
Wow. I'm very much looking forward to it, Rejoy. And, dear listeners, if you've made it this far and you still haven't subscribed, well, I think that you might actually like us more than we like you. Or at least you like us more than you're prepared to admit publicly. So why don't you make it official and hit the subscribe button? Just use a fake username so your mom doesn't know that you're secretly dating us bad boys.
On that note, until next time.
Cheers to history.
Cheers, history.